Crime investigators, what's the creepiest unsolved case you investigated that scares you to this day? Back in the early 80s, a 16-year-old boy was walking home from a party about a mile from his house, when he was intentionally hit by a vehicle and dragged by the vehicle, before being dumped in front of his house for his father to find his body in the morning. The police say they have suspects but not enough evidence to make any arrests. There are still posters all over the town and surrounding areas with his picture asking for information more than 35 years later. Really a tragic story that needs closure. Edit. This is the Eric Cross case, and I am not an investigator, just a local. Someone was picking up drunk homeless people in my town about 20 years back, beating them up and dropping them far from town during the winter season, which can last for about 2 to 8 months and drop as low as -45°C. At my first apartment, someone was stringing up dogs in the trees behind houses with their throats cut and bled dry. Serial killer behavior, obviously just killing them to kill them. Worked on that case a couple weeks, but after 4 or 5 dogs it just stopped, and my bosses wouldn't let me work on it anymore with all the real crime going on. I still think it was a future serial killer practicing. I work as an investigator for the county medical examiner. The cases that always creep me out are the Jane and John Does, especially the younger ones. How could a family not report a loved one missing for 10, 20, or 30 years? Some of these cases are not suspicious, so it's not like the family is worried about going to prison. We're looking at forensic genealogy to assist with some of the cases. Mystery was solved a few days after it happened, but I figured I would share anyways. In the town I live in there's a rundown motel that all the druggies stay at. Well anyways, there was a night that a man walked into and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun, and blew the cashier's brains all over the wall. Stole $112 and some change. Obviously an investigation was opened, and for 4 days they didn't have any leads or anything. Turns out, on the evening of the 4th night, they supposedly found the murderer behind the motel in a cornfield, in a fetal position just rocking back and forth. All the people going missing in federal parks. FBI does not track them. Guesses are 1,600 each year disappear and some are not found. It happens at an alarmingly high rate compared to other places. Worked in forensics 2004 to 2008, mostly rapes, homicides, and cold cases. Never forgot one where a baby was abused, because a burglar threatened to kill the entire family if the parent didn't do it. Wasn't solved before I left, and nothing came up on Google. Never forgot names. The idea that someone out there free is that effed up or that someone would make that crap up is so disturbing to me. Not an investigator. In League City, Texas, there used to be a dead-end road. The city grew like crazy. In the process of clearing land they found dozens of girls buried. Still several unidentified. They stumbled onto the dumping ground for a serial killer. It's called a road if you're familiar with that area. They did a documentary on it at some point. My sister went to prom with a guy who lived next door to this. One night she is over at his house and a random girl comes running, no shows on, screaming, banging on the door saying some guy picked her up or was following her. Boys say the man was nowhere to be found. Prom date and brother get her to safety, then proceed to tell my sister all the weird ghost stories because weird things like that always happen around here. They thought she was spooked by feelings of being watched or something. Until a few years later when they started finding bodies. Again. I'm not an investigator, but this happened to a little girl in my brother's class and a friend from school. My friend was a happy-go-lucky, chubby guy that everyone liked. He smoked a little weed from time to time, which made it hard for him to keep a job. One day he goes missing and is found in his barn swinging from a rafter by a friend of his. Suicide note. No ladder or any way for him to have gotten up to the rafter. No typical signs of depression or suicide such as saying goodbye to loved ones, taking care of loose ends, etc. Gets written off as a suicide, case temporarily closed. 6-year-old girl was missing from her home in the morning, found in the barn hanging from the rafter and raped/molested with a knife. Stepdad had porn of her on his computer and somehow was cleared on the murder by pinning it on a teenage neighbor. Neighbor kid claimed stepdad put him up to it and smoked weed with him, but there was no evidence to convict, and the teenager went to jail for murder while stepdad got a reduced sentence for child porn. Neither got a drug charge, which was also weird. The reason I mentioned these together. Stepdad was the friend who called in my friend's death. After no luck with the county, I anonymously messaged Channel 5 and they had to reopen after it was reported publicly that they missed something. Forensic analyst said the suicide note was faked. Suddenly the detective on the case finds there was a ladder present, reclosed the case, and retired. Dude got away with murder, twice in one case and once in another. I'd consider both unsolved till the right guy goes down for them. 2 girls in their 20s round murdered in their car. McDonald's food in their laps. Windows up. Doors locked. No sign of a struggle. Was my last case I ever worked. 3 years ago. No suspects have been arrested. Murdered how? Gunshots to the back of the head. I think that solves that reason they didn't struggle. My hypothesis would be that it was someone they knew in the back seats of the car, then 2 quick shots, or 2 people fired a handgun. They would have the keys, so they would lock the car and leave as if nothing had happened. In a town close to me, a few years ago a little boy went missing. He was in a foster home with his siblings. There were apparent previous reports from neighbors of them wandering off frequently because they were left alone without food, breaking into garages I think. He was reported missing by the foster mom. She went on TV and everything I think I remember. There were so many search parties. We live in the desert so there's a lot of open land. I stopped hearing things about it. Eventually I asked one of my buddies who works in that PD and he told me they never got any real answers. They found remains years later that they believed to be his in a canal, but it had been so long not much was left. Also they think wild animals had probably spread what was left of the remains around after all these years. There's a man who comes into the bar I work at every day around 4 p.m. He's nice, has a group of other guys he socializes with. His wife comes in every Sunday with him for football season. Their daughter went missing a few years ago. They had a suspect, who my older sister actually dated for a short period. When they couldn't definitively connect him to the case, they cut him loose. He's now serving time for a completely separate kidnapping/murder. He hasn't confessed to the first one, so the couple will never really know if they caught the guy. Everyone just assumes. I don't think the family will ever get closure off of an assumption though. Not a crime investigator, but I had a good buddy that went missing in a cornfield when he was a 2-year-old kid, back in 80 or 81. Literally thousands of volunteers came out to help search the fields and land around his farm for 2 days, but he was nowhere to be found. They even brought in a psychic. His parents were so desperate. On the 3rd day he was finally found, quite some distance from where he disappeared. His parents still think to this day that he was abducted, but because of all the media attention and people searching for him, the kidnappers returned him, pretty much just dropping him off and hightailing it out of there. My father was a police officer some time ago. While in school his platoon was called with every other policeman in region. A kid was missing. They were looking for him for quite some time, yet they did not find him. He was supposed to be somewhere in small forest near the town he was living in. Kid just sunk. After some time, people would contact police and say that kid was seen almost 500 kilometers away. Alone. They had many suspects but all got the alibi. The case was open for almost 20 years and was closed like 10 years ago. We'll try to find some info about it edit post, but here in Poland we do not put such information to public. Not a crime investigator, but Diao Aging went missing about a decade ago and was found in boxes. It is estimated that she was cut up into around 2,000 pieces. When they put her back together they were missing a heart, spleen, and liver. My personal theory is black market organ transplants, to sell or to use I don't know, maybe to sell because the heart sells for around $1 million on the black market. I don't work in crime investigation anymore. I do animal rescue. But we kept receiving animals found stray that had been sexually abused with sticks, and we had to take them in, help them recover and find new homes. It happened for 2 years straight, then nothing. He's either dead, locked up or moved on to humans. Police have DNA but no one has ever been caught or linked to it. Not me, but my dad told me about this. On the Gold Coast in Australia in the 1990s, there was a Chinese mob. The wife of the leader wanted a new husband and boy toy. The following is all presumed, but she got people in the mob to kill him. She then presumably cut him up with a garden saw, This is based off of neighbors' reports of a chainsaw at 1 a.m. for long periods. It was presumed that she put the body in gym bags and put it next to the bin. A teenager saw the bags and wanted to take them, but he kicked the bags, and it was squishy, so he decided not to. When she reported her husband as missing, she was the prime suspect. The police found the bathroom covered in blood using UV light. The body was never found, so it could never be pointed to her. She was convicted on assumptions due to her already affiliation with the mob. She gets released next year from a life sentence. I'm a cop, but this isn't my case. The FBI believes that over nearly 2 decades a trucker or multiple truckers have been killing women and dumping their bodies along their routes. In 2004, an FBI wonk notices a trend of bodies being dumped along a commercial trucking route in the South and submits it to a crime tracking database. Texas analyst picks it up and they find dozens of identical cases. No leads to this day. No suspects. No convictions. Not one myself, but this case shocked everyone. Girl went missing, pregnant at the time, 36 weeks. Police interviewed everyone, the boyfriend, the other boyfriend, friends, mother, neighbors, etc. Body was found almost a year and a half later, on a shed. Not 100 yards from her house, the killer tied her up, and buried her alive, all the while she was on labor, then covered her with concrete. When found, the baby was halfway through the birthing canal, head already out. Case is still ongoing, they have a suspect, but there is still a couple of years away from anything concrete. On my town we found a dead body. The middle of a street, a good neighborhood. Never figured out who was this person since nobody ever filed a missing person for him. Creepy part? He was beheaded, and the head was inside his stomach. Sounds like some cartel stuff. Mind telling us what country? State? Venezuela. Oh yeah, cartel or gov did that crap. Similar things happened in Mexico where my family came from. How did they get the head into the stomach? They slit open the stomach, I'm assuming? Slit open and pulled out the intestines before. It seemed like they tried to do some stitches too. What still bothers me is that nobody ever found out who this guy was, and why got such an awful death, since the neighborhood is safe enough for this kind of crimes. Not a crime investigator, but the older brother of someone I went to high school with disappeared in August of 2017. He had gotten into drugs, went to rehab, and was trying to rebuild his life when he went to Maryland to visit a friend from rehab. When he got there, the friend had made other plans but sent him to hang out with this other woman in her 40s. He was not allowed at the woman's house, so she drove him to a piece of property her uncle owned, left him there to detox without any food, water or shelter, and claimed she would be back soon. She left him there for 3 days, claimed to drop off supplies, but his parents have their doubts about that. When the parents came a week later, he was gone and the woman claimed to not know where he went. A couple months later his body was found over 100 miles away. His death is being investigated and I believe the state is building a murder case against the woman. I will be following when that happens. Very sad story. If anyone wants to Google it, his name was David Gibson Smith. We had a neighbor who killed cats, by decapitation, and put them in the owner's mailboxes together with a note. He did this more than 50 times. When they found out who it was, they found that he was planning to kill a person and got a couple of years in jail. He now lives alone in a forest somewhere and cannot show himself in his hometown cause everyone know who he is. When I was a kid, a girl in my neighborhood went missing. It was a big thing and everyone searched and found nothing. Then about 3 weeks later the neighbors of the girl called the police. The teenage boy of their family killed the girl and put her body in his water bed. Obligatory not a crime investigator. Richard Cody Haynes has been missing since September 11, 2004. His dad and stepmom were the last to see him alive. He refused to do his chores that night and he was forced to stay in the kitchen until midnight and was then sent to his room. His sisters were told to not go near him. There was a scuffle between Cody and his father's girlfriend, and at 2:30 a.m., his father went on a drive to look for car parts, while Cody was supposedly in his room and doesn't return until 4 p.m. the next day. During this time no one checked on Cody and at 5 p.m. his father filed a missing persons report. His father and his girlfriend lawyered up pretty quickly and it creeps me out that seemingly nothing is getting done about finding who killed him. I hope his mom gets justice for her son's killer. A girl in my town went missing this year. There were several theories running around and I managed to get some info because I'm a nosy bastard. They obviously suspected the boyfriend, someone twice her age, married and a very strict Muslim. She was in her late teens, white and was either an atheist or Christian. Learned a family member has a restraining order due to conflict. It's suspected to be an honor killing or she's been taken out of the country to be trafficked. I've read and learned about trafficking in the Middle East. It makes me hope she just ran away or she was killed. It's better than living through that. Not a crime scene investigator, and the case was solved but it never sat right with me. In my neighborhood a 30-year-old Russian girl with a mental disability went missing for 7 days. She was then found dead in a park, only partially clothed. She had been set on fire and died as a result of the burns. Edit. It was officially ruled a suicide. In high school I knew a girl through mutual friends in our very small town. She was a freshman and I was a senior. The story goes she was walking home around 1 a.m. from a community of trailers about 3 miles from town, and before leaving called her mom for a ride. Mom was a drug addict and refused to come get her. She never made it home. 5 to 6 years later I return home from the military and see a newspaper article. Her remains were found wrapped in barbed wire in a canal. The crazy part is that it had to be a local. I know this, because where they found her body was a popular swimming spot in the community, and was miles from town and on the completely opposite side of town from where she was the night she went missing. No one swims there now, and the whole thing is largely forgotten by the community with the exception of those who went to school with her. Anyone remembers this famous case where a girl went missing, looked like she ran away? Her car was found on a highway. Then some guy started uploading YouTube vids made in a basement of some sort, playing musical instruments with exact details only the police and the father knew, along with some things her father said in an interview. The police were never able to identify who the guy was. Look into Maura Murray and 112 Dirtbag. A man from Australia called Mr. Cruel. Kidnapped a bunch of teenage girls, did a lot of disgusting things to them and his last victim wound up dead. My auntie personally knew 2 of the girls who were kidnapped. He hasn't struck in 20 years and has never been found. Medical story, but trust me, it's a good one. So I worked in a major hospital as a CNA in the MICU. We got a guy one night and the story we got was that he was found unconscious in his apartment. The story unfolded throughout the night and the next day and continued to get more and more bizarre. First, he was hypothermic because the AC had been turned on and it was winter, so it was well below freezing in the house. Also, he had some kind of major trauma to his testicles, we didn't know what because it had been dressed and he was going straight to the OR. One way or the other, this was reported to the police and they reported that they had suspected something because the dog that was at the scene had blood all over his mouth. At this point we were thinking that maybe the dog attacked him, and he passed out and somehow, he fell and turned on the AC. The report came back from the OR and they said that the patient's testicles had been cut out intentionally by a dull knife. Now we thought that someone had attacked the guy, cut out his balls, fed them to the dog, and turned on the AC, leaving him for dead. We were thinking maybe he raped someone or something and this was a revenge crime. The next day he was extubated and conscious. The nurse went in to introduce herself and said something like, "We are so sorry that this happened to you." His response? "Why are you sorry? I did it to myself." He had cut out his own balls, fed them to his dog and turned on the AC to kill himself. He was moved to another unit right after this, so we never found out any further details. Easily the most bizarre medical story I have to tell from my years as a CNA. Truly haunting. I'm not a CSI, but if anyone know the steps to become one, I'm all ears. But my cousin was found dead. She was raped and her body was snapped in half backwards. Police assumed she was alive when they broke her spine but are not sure if she was raped alive. We don't know who did it to this day, but there was a wrong arrest and detainment that didn't seem likely but we had nothing else to work with. This was in Mexico, so I don't believe it was in the news and if it was quite a while ago. Almost an entire family on holiday shot as they pulled up to a beauty spot. One child only survived by hiding under her dead mother's skirt for 8 hours. Was 6 or 7 years ago. Cost me the job I loved. Still unsolved, still haunts me. Disclaimer. not involved in law enforcement. In my sleepy little city during the 70s and 80s there was an ongoing series of teenage boys and young men being kidnapped, tortured, repeatedly raped and then horrifically murdered. It was almost an open secret that it was a group of judges, lawyers and some psychos for muscle. The cops seemed almost not to care at all because the victims were all homeless druggies or male prostitutes. Until one day, the gang made the mistake of kidnapping, raping, torturing and killing someone who mattered. The teenage son of a prominent media figure, so the police were forced to do something. Eventually a school janitor was arrested and put away for life. Everyone knows he's a patsy, but the murders stopped, and the patsy is probably the best looked after and richest man in the state prison system. There were also a couple of lawyers who were murdered, and it is suspected that they were involved but were deemed security risks by the others and taken care of.